front in the building. And this is the last of the seminars for research seminars. We are, put this in your books, June 15th and 16th, having a researching the arts. That sounds like something. Let's Researching the Arts Conference for PhD students will be presenting the work. So 15th and 16th, which would be lovely to see MA students, third year students, first students, if you're around, June 15th, 16th, yeah? So remember that. So I'm very happy to invite Nick Hunt.
Hello.
Hello. And Rachel, his assistant that's come to help him work. And it's really exciting to have someone who's here to talk about how his passion and experience and professional experience as a lighting designer has then transformed into becoming an artistic vision, and how we look at the expressive potential of light, not just lighting the subject, but how it itself is expressive as a medium. So that's lovely, because we haven't had anyone come and talk to us about that this year. So welcome.
Brilliant, thank you.
And I'll let you.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, take it from there. Great, right. Hello everybody. I'll just tell you a little bit about my background first of all, just so you kind of know where I'm coming from. It's kind of first half of my career so far, roughly, was as a lighting technician and lighting designer in the professional theatre. Some periods I was freelancing, working in regional theatres around the country. Doing quite a lot of design as well as the technical end of lighting, I suppose. And quite a lot of my research interests, I think, are kind of motivated by some of the experiences, good and bad, that I had during that part of my kind of life as a professional lighting person. And I think I want to start, well, I'll give you a quick précis of how this is going to work. I'm going to talk at you for a bit, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this thing, which I know has intrigued at least some of you so far, and where that sits in the context of my research. I'm going to show you a short video clip of a performance that we did as a research project to kind of test out some of the ideas that this lighting control system embodies. And I'm going to attempt a little demonstration just to run through that same video clip with some lighting in here. Obviously it's not completely the same setup, but it hopefully will give you a bit of an idea. And then if anybody's feeling brave enough who wants to come and have a play with it, that would be great, and we can have a look at it, and then we can take questions and just generally kind of move into a kind of discussion mode. Okay. I want to start, I suppose, with an observation about professional lighting practice, and do bear in mind through this that I am talking primarily in terms of relatively what we might call mainstream theatre practice, essentially. And that is that there are changes, it seems to me, some of which have been going on for some time, but particularly if you look at the work of companies like Complicité, Robert Lepage's Ex Machina, Builders Association, I'm sure you probably all name a bunch of others, those kind of contemporary theatre, perhaps post-dramatic, but certainly sort of quite interested in process as well as what and where that gets you to in terms of the kind of work that they can make, generally producing work that operates on an international touring circuit. A lot of those companies and practitioners have started in recent years to really start using particularly sound and video as part of a rehearsal process. And occasionally lighting, but not anything like as often as sound and video, and occasionally sort of set design and costume design being pulled into that process as well. But certainly I think what I'm pointing to really is a shift in practices whereby things that previously were designed relatively separately from the rehearsal process. So a sound designer, a lighting designer, set designer would read the script if there is one, have a conversation with the director, go away, work on something, come back. There's a plan that's kind of running in parallel with the rehearsal process. and then the whole thing gets put together at the end, usually in a rather fraught few days in the theatre, which some people absolutely love and other people, including quite a lot of directors I know, absolutely hate, and which, with a bit of luck, ends up as being a production that feels fairly holistic and as if it's all designed together, and quite often doesn't. And I've certainly been involved in quite a number of shows that seemed to be working fantastically well in the rehearsal room, and that were absolutely killed in the transfer out of the rehearsal room onto the stage. And I've seen and even occasionally contributed to shows where the reverse thing happened. But it all seems rather an uncertain process. And so I'm very interested in observing what, again, particularly sound and video designers are doing, taking their kit into the rehearsal room, developing what they're doing through a rehearsal process, and not simply responding to what a director and performers are doing in the rehearsal room, but actually contributing to that as well. So you stick up a video clip, or you add a sound, or you do something, and everybody else, oh, that's kind of interesting. Okay, so if we've got that, then how do we respond to that? And it becomes a properly kind of integrated, holistic, creative process. But as I said, lighting, you know, there are occasional examples of it, but it seems to be less common. There are obviously logistical difficulties with it. It's relatively straightforward to stick a sound system into a rehearsal room, video, bit of a screen, whatever. It's considerably harder given the way that rehearsals are resourced, certainly in most kind of Western European and American practice, to put a lighting rig into a rehearsal room of any kind of size and complexity. So that's, I think, a key starting point for me, the thought that could lighting be somehow more integrated into that creative process? And the suggestion, therefore, I suppose there's a shift that I'm arguing for, which is for the person that is currently identified as a lighting designer to perhaps be more like a performer. And clearly, being more like begs perhaps rather more questions than it answers. What do we, you know, what might we mean by that? And hopefully some of that might become clear as I go on. But in order to understand in a bit more detail where we're at now, I want to talk a little bit about where lighting as a professional practice in the theatre has come from historically. The conception that we now have of the lighting designer, this person who makes what we might call a prior imaginary act ahead of the performance, ahead of the moment of performance, and that imaginary act is somehow realised in physical terms through a lighting rig, a technical apparatus, a series of processes and procedures, and is then delivered during the actual performance in front of an audience, again through a set of technical and other processes and procedures and apparatuses. So that's, it seems to me, kind of the essence of this idea of design. You do something ahead of time and then it gets reproduced, and quite often quite mechanically reproduced. And certainly if any of you are at all familiar with the processes in large-scale commercial theatre, so think West End and Broadway musicals perhaps particularly, those shows have a stack of paperwork literally that thick that defines what the lighting is. It's a thing called the Bible, and it is, you know, endless paperwork, or these days of course endless computer files, that say what every light does, when it does it, how you focus it on the stage, or if it's an automated light, exactly what all of its sequences are, where it has to be rigged, all of this stuff. You can take that paperwork and you can reproduce the lighting for that show in almost any theatre with the right sort of physical capacity anywhere in the world, and that's precisely what happens. There are probably, to take an example, about half a dozen Billy Elliots running this evening in different parts of the world. So Rick Fisher, who lights that, goes around the world, or on the smaller production sends an assistant around the world to reproduce that production. Now it seems to me you kind of understand why, from a commercial point of view, that seems like a a good way of working. You've got a product that's successful. You want to manufacture as much of that product as you can in order to make as much money as you can. That's fine, but it seems to me to move rather a long way from my notion of theatre as an art form, really, which seems to be about people being in a room together and making something that at least partly is made in the moment and seen in the moment in which it's made. So that conception of the designer really emerges in the 1950s onwards. Before that, there's no professional role that is responsible exclusively for lighting in the theatre. Lighting is done by what were then called producers, what we now recognise as the director, really, and then reproduced on tour, if it's a touring production, usually by the company stage manager. At a time when lighting was a lot simpler than it is now, certainly from a technical point of view, where the artistic ambition for lighting was, in many cases, a lot less. There were people who were artistically quite ambitious with lighting, but they're fairly few and far between. And when that role emerges, it comes out of, or the first people doing that who kind of go, actually, things are now complicated enough that you, Mr. Director, might like somebody who specialises in lighting. You don't have to worry about it. Get on with dealing with the actors, this, that and the other that you worry about, because it's all getting a bit complicated technically. So I can take that burden off you, and maybe I've got some ideas through my experience that artistically might enhance what you're doing. But nevertheless, I'm clearly subservient to you because you're the director, so ultimately you get to say. And so those early lighting specialists who became lighting designers were people who had previously been stage managers very often, or heads of technical departments in the theatre, who were able to establish a kind of artistic credentials for themselves. And simply adopted, and it's very clear from the documentary evidence that they left, that they quite consciously adopted the role of designer, modelling themselves on the existing role of the set and costume designer. And so they kind of set up this recognisable figure. I'm a lighting designer, I'm the same as that other designer you already know how to work with, you've got a working method, you've got a clear working relationship, you know kind of what they're responsible for, so it's pretty obvious what I'm responsible for. So this is a fairly low risk shift of responsibility, if you like, without letting go of too much power, which we know directors are generally quite keen to hold on to, with some notable exceptions, it has to be said. So that history then kind of follows through, and really that role of the lighting designer that was constructed in the 1950s and 1960s hasn't really changed in the 50 years since to any really significant extent. However, there was a historical moment shortly before that when there was another proposition on the table, as it were. And that came from a man called Fred Bentham, who, as a relatively young man in his 20s, started working for Strand, what was then called Strand Electric, which had fairly rapidly grown over the space of only about 15 years or so, to be the leading lighting manufacturer in the UK, and particularly actually off the back of the boom in cinema building, where there was a lot more money and a lot more activity going on than in the theatre, and the same kind of lighting technologies were actually going into cinemas. And Bentham started working, as I say, as a young man for Strand Lighting, and he had an idea. He had an idea that lighting should be artistic, which was certainly something that wasn't shared all that widely. He had an idea that lighting should be operated in the moment, should be performed in the way that, for example, a musician performs a piece of music, and that therefore you needed a technical apparatus that allowed that to happen. Now, the technology at the time, bearing in mind we are talking pre-electronic, pretty much all theatres are electric by this point, so I'm talking about early 1930s. So we've got electric lighting in most theatres, but we don't really have electronics, certainly for not that that kind of application. So it's very mechanical. Rachel, perhaps could we have the Grandmaster slide up? Yeah. So this image is of a lighting control system called a Grandmaster, which is a typical top-of-the-range lighting control system from that interwar period. It's completely mechanical. Just to give you a sense of scale, that's about 8 feet to a bit over 2 meters tall. It weighs a lot because it's made out of metal. The dimmers in it are entirely mechanical. Basically, you've got a lever on the front of it for each dimmer, which is then connected to a light to control the intensity of the light. So it's lots of wheels and cogs and chain drives and stuff to kind of link all this together so you can do a fade. It takes, obviously, at least one person to operate, but for a busy show, 2, 3, maybe even 4 operators. It's almost always located backstage. If it's not located backstage, it's probably located under the stage. So you can either see nothing at all or very little of what's going on the stage. So you're, as the lighting operator, it's an entirely rote procedure of operating the show. You get cued by the stage manager who tells you when to do it. You've got a piece of paper that tells you what to do, that's been worked out by the director through a lighting rehearsal ahead of the show. So artistic input from the operator, 0. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't. So Bentham comes along and says, well, this is no good. We need somebody who can see the stage, have one person, not a team of people, so there's a degree of, you know, kind of one person with an oversight of this, who has some artistic understanding and artistic sensitivity to what's happening on the stage and can respond accordingly, and who is equipped with an instrument of some kind which is allowing a kind of some kind of creative or artistic expression through the light. If we can go to the next picture. This is Fred Bentham with a splendid 1930s haircut as a young man sitting at his invention, which is the light console. And if it looks a lot like a cinema organ of the period, that's because it was. Bentham's brilliant insight, actually, was to realise that the cinema organ as a piece of technology was an extremely sophisticated way of controlling things, and it doesn't have to be just organ pipes. It could be lighting. And he took that as an existing piece of technology, which is quite new and cutting edge at the time, and another little bit of technology that somebody else at Strand had invented but hadn't really worked out what to do with, and realised that he could get that front end to talk to the same dimmers that were in the Grandmaster control. And at that point he had a piece of kit which, although relatively large, was still small enough to put front of house so you could actually see the stage, and it could communicate electrically and really pretty much for the first time, so in terms of UK lighting practice, the first time an electrical connection between the interface and the dimmers. So this was Bentham's proposition. An artistically capable and artistically sensitive, an artistically commissioned, if you like, person, given that responsibility, out front, operating the lighting. And he had this idea that, okay, you could rehearse it, you could do it on cues and it's planned, but maybe not, actually. Maybe you just pitch up and, okay, you need to know the show, you need to know what's going to happen, but you respond in the moment, in the way that perhaps a musician might improvise to, you know, we think of perhaps those pianists who played for silent films, who would improvise to a film. So he had this idea, and indeed, generally when these light consoles were put into theatres, Bentham would turn up and would operate at least the first production that was lit with it, and he did it in exactly that way. However, there was a snag. The light console was expensive, more expensive by a considerable factor than a Grandmaster. It had a crucial limitation in that you couldn't predetermine the dimmer levels that you would get when you brought lights up. And Bentham was really unlucky, actually, timing-wise, because he invented this at a time when, very shortly afterwards, the way of lighting the stage changed considerably, and the number of lights being used went up quite a lot, and the need to balance levels accurately between one light and another light to compose an image on the stage became much greater as the style of lighting shifted. And so the light console was slightly left behind by this. So in the end, there were about 16 of them made. Some of them went into some very curious places, most of them in the UK, but one in Poland, one in Portugal, two, bizarrely, in Venezuela. Very curious little odd places. They got these commissions where people obviously had a very different idea and suddenly looked at that and went, actually, yeah, that's really interesting, we want that. But generally, from a commercial point of view, not a success. However, from my point of view, of considerable interest, because it seems to me that Bentham's ideas chimed with some of mine, really. And so Bentham's really kind of, in a way, set some of the parameters for my research project, which is, again, to make this shift from designer to performer, to create a situation whereby that what I've termed the lighting artist works through a rehearsal process in the room with the other performers, with actors, with the director, to develop what we might think of perhaps as a lighting score to run through a performance, and which is certainly pre-planned and is pre-rehearsed, but that defers certain decisions, particularly creative decisions, until the moment of performance. And particularly I'm interested in the subtleties and nuances of timing in that respect. Because one of my great frustrations in my experience as a lighting designer has been this business that the expectation is that, okay, you set up this lighting cue and you work on it often in quite a lot of detail, you know, kind of channel 5 up 5%, down 2%, getting that composition exactly balanced correctly. And then you stick a time on it, 5 seconds, to go from that to the next stage picture, and somebody presses the button when they're told to, and the desk does what it does. And you can fiddle around with it. You can get that little blue light at the back, I'd like that to go a bit quicker, and this other light, I'd like to go just slightly slower or start a fraction later. You can, but it gets very fiddly. And of course, the adjustments that you make one time are a response to the last performance you saw. And the next performance you saw, of course, is slightly different. So you're always kind of running behind. And always feeling that what I really wanted was not, you know, a good stage manager will call the cue accurately and will allow for the tiny lag that you get between calling the cue and the operator pressing the button and the lighting change happening. And they'll be able to get your lighting cue. If you want that cue absolutely on a moment in the performance, a really good DSM will do that time after time. Fantastic. But how do you get them to get the end of the lighting cue to happen on a moment? How do you get that blackout to just hit blackout at the exact moment that actor walks out the door and off the stage, or whatever it is that happens? Because you're then anticipating the 5 seconds. So I guess 5 seconds ahead of now the actor's going to be at the door. I can kind of work that out. But wouldn't it be better if somebody was actually manually operating that fade and riding the fade and getting it just on the moment? So it was those kind of experiences that made me think, well, do you know what? Actually operating this thing live. And in a way I was very lucky professionally, because literally for the first year of my professional life as the assistant electrician at the Salisbury Playhouse, we had a lighting desk that only had manual faders on it. It was memory desk, but the crossfading from one lighting state to the other, it didn't have a go button. And I learnt from that actually both the great satisfaction of operating that, but also the artistic potential of getting those fades just right for tonight's performance, not yesterday's. And so all of this has fed through. And so that's part of the motivation behind this thing. And the other really kind of major part of it, as well as live operation, because you could say, well, live operation, well, just go back, get yourself an old lighting desk out of the cupboard, and, you know, with lots of faders on it, and go and use that, and that's live, and that's fine. You don't need to do a big research project and write papers and read books and all of that. You just go and do it. However, there's another aspect to this, which again is very historically rooted. Because when the light console, Bentham's light console, failed as a commercial proposition. It was effectively replaced, all the consoles that came along were based on what some of you might be aware of. There's still a few of them around, the preset, the manual preset desk, where you basically have a row of faders, one for every light effectively, or every dimmer, and then you have another row, and that's the simplest. You've got 2 presets. So you can have one preset live, so the levels you set on the faders there are what you see on the stage, and you can set up another lighting state on the other one, and when you get to the cue you crossfade between them. And if you've got a fancy one of these, it's got more than 2 presets, but the principle's exactly the same. And it was that idea of presetting that really took over. The light console couldn't do it. The light console is absolutely live in the moment. It doesn't remember anything, you can't preset anything. You have to press the right keys at the right moment to make the lighting change happen. And that was this big frustration with it, really. And it certainly, I mean, it had a terrible reputation amongst a lot of professionals at the time. I just hated it. You toured a show into a theatre with a light console. Oh, God, give me a grandmaster every day from their point of view. You know how to work that. So this idea of presetting then becomes deeply, deeply embedded in how we do lighting. Because theatre lighting, essentially, even now, even though we've got fancy controls that can do all kinds of other stuff, is still rooted in this idea that you create a stage picture and you plot it and you record it into the desk, and then you create another one and you record that, and another one and another one, and you go through them, and then when it comes to the show you press the button and it fades from one picture to the next. And sure, you can do all sorts of other things. You can change the timings, you can have different things going on at the same time, you can have multi-part fades that are kind of whole series of stage pictures all linked together, you can have one bunch of lights going off and doing a thing on its own. There's all sorts of things you can do. But by and large, you don't. That practice is still really rooted in this thing that I call the state cue model, because it's a series of lighting states and cues that get you from one to the next. So there's a kind of diagrammatic representation of that running down a timeline. They're these kind of snapshot images that are themselves static. Sits there for a bit, then there's a change, then it sits there for a bit longer, then there's another change. And again, in terms of my professional experience, for a lot of shows, it's kind of fine, because in a way, the idea of what that theatre production is it's the same idea that gave rise to that model. And so the model works for that conception of theatre, and it's fine. But since that model arose in the 50s and 60s, people have had other ideas of theatre, and particularly the influence of film on theatre, and television on theatre, and on writers who write, you know, they don't write plays with 3 acts, all set in one place for a whole act, and then everybody goes for a drink while a lot of sweaty stagehands change the scenery and put something else on the stage, and you come back and the curtain goes up and everybody applauds. Or, you know, that's largely been swept away, and that kind of theatre, that's fine, that kind of lighting, great. You know, one lighting state, and maybe fiddle around with it occasionally. Somebody walks on and turns the standard lamp on, you have a cue. But, you know, that was old-fashioned when I started, and that's, you know, more years ago than I care to mention. Theatre's different, but it still feels like we're locked into this old model. And I've lit plenty of shows where essentially I wanted the lighting to be changing basically all the time. Continuous change. And once you make that as a design decision, as an artistic decision, that that's the right way to light this production, you're then in a bind, because first of all, you've probably got a lot of cues, and will you have time to plot them all? Well, that's an issue. And even if you do, great, you plot them all and you get into a technical rehearsal and you start running stuff. A cue gets called, and this maybe 5-minute lighting transition starts to happen. And it's all going well for the first 30 seconds, and the director says, oh, can we just stop a minute? Hang on, we'll just sort out this bit of blocking. So you do. And with a bit of luck, the operator's on the ball and they've halted the cue. And then we start again and they've restarted the cue. But we're not quite in time with where we would have been otherwise. Or the director says, can we just go back to the top of the previous page? And you're going, well, I have no idea where in this 5-minute cue that is. I'll guess. Maybe it's a minute and a half into the 5-minute cue. So we try and find that. You never know if what you're looking at is actually what you'll get when you run the thing to time properly. Once you get to a dress rehearsal, you can't stop to change anything. You can't edit that cue halfway through it running. So from a very pragmatic point of view, it's a complete nightmare doing those kind of shows. And the only way they happen at all is partly because of if you've got a really good operator and you're an experienced designer and you work together well, people, good operators work fast. And if you've got 15 seconds to modify a lighting state and re-record it back in before the next thing happens, they'll do it. But you don't really have time to stop and think about that at all. And in big shows, it will happen because they get run endlessly in previews. Again, that kind of West End model. It's very refined because it's sat in previews for 10, 15, 20 performances, and the lighting design is there refining as you go through. And then, of course, it gets locked down after the first night. The lighting designer's gone off to do something else, and the show continues to evolve. The actors keep on changing, and the lighting's sat there, frozen, doing its static thing, gradually drifting apart from where the show's actually got to. So it's all of these kind of thoughts that interested me. And so I thought, what could we do about this state cue model? How could we replace it with something else? And what I came up with, if we can have the next slide, is what I call a thread impulse model. And this is a kind of 90-degree shift on the timeline, really. This says, rather than having these cues that are a complete stage picture that exist for a period on the timeline and then get replaced, let's have what I've called threads, which are bits of the lighting that can have a continuous existence through the show. And those bits of the lighting are defined, if you like, by an effect, an artistic, dramatic, aesthetic value that light might have. So, say we've got some blue backlight. That presumably, in artistic terms, has some kind of significance. It clearly has an aesthetic effect, produces an aesthetic response in the audience. It may have a dramatic significance, which may be as kind of crude, if you like, as a kind of Wagnerian leitmotif idea. When this character comes on, it always goes blue. Or it may be something rather more nuanced and subtle than that. But nevertheless, it's there for a purpose, has a rationale to it, artistically. So let it have a continuous existence. It may not be visible the whole time, but it somehow conceptually is present as an idea throughout the piece. And if you construct your lighting out of a series of these, then what happens through the duration of the performance is that these threads arrive and disappear. And the motivation for those changes are impulses, if you like, and they're an impulse on the part of the lighting artist. A change is appropriate now because something has happened on stage, or perhaps this appears to be the right moment to prompt something else to happen. So something that the light does may prompt something else. So there's this kind of interaction of these multiple elements that have a life through the show, some of which are lighting, as shown here, and some of which are, all of the other myriad of elements, what performers are doing, what the sound's doing, what the video's doing, what the set's doing, what the audience is doing, and so on. And so this is another kind of key concept. And it has to be said, in a way, it's not completely original, because this is very much how rock and roll concert lighting works. Much more like this than the theatre model. What rock and roll concert lighting generally doesn't do, though, is pursue rigorously this idea of the threads having a conceptual or affective value to themselves. They tend to be units of convenience, if you like, which may also have affective value, but it doesn't have this kind of conceptual underpinning that I'm trying to introduce here. Okay. Let me just look at my notes and see if I've missed anything out. I don't think I have. Probably enough, to bring us on to this thing. Thanks, Rachel. And just to explain it a little bit, I suppose. essentially, this is a console which enshrines all of that thinking that I've just taken you through. It's absolutely designed for a rehearsal process. I need to be clear, it is not designed to improvise on, as I discovered slightly to my cost in the practical piece, a sort of research project, a performance piece that we did with it. Only in the improvising in rehearsal. There was never an intention to improvise in performance, but improvising in rehearsal was more difficult than I'd anticipated, and that's maybe a future area for thinking about. But it is designed to playwright live. And it's also designed partly because, as research projects tend to have, I had an awful lot of things I just wanted to try out and have a play with. So there's an awful lot of bits to it, as it were, which you wouldn't necessarily need all of, but there were things that I wanted to experiment with. And also designed with the thought that if an instrument is an expressive tool for somebody who's creating artistically in the moment of performance, then there's a question about how an instrument captures those expressive qualities. And I think we're fairly used, maybe the obvious analogy is perhaps with a musical instrument. We're aware that a violin playing a particular note is different to a piano playing the same note, is different to a trombone, is different to whatever else, and that comes out of the acousto-mechanical properties of the instrument. It makes a different sound. The difficulty for lighting, of course, is it doesn't quite work like that, because the thing that you manipulate doesn't directly produce the light that you see. There's a whole load of stuff in between: lights, dimmers, digital signals, all of that. So one of the questions for me was, how do I capture the expressive qualities of the hand of the artist, if you like, and allow those to inform the lights, and particularly the time dynamics of the light that we see on stage, which is why we have things like the big lever here, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a moment, but there's absolutely no difference electrically and electronically and in terms of its function between that and a bog standard fader here. It does exactly the same thing, except of course the physicality of the operator in relation to it is different, and it changes therefore the way that you operate a change of light. Okay, so there's various things like that. You can see on the screen here, basically this is designed to run 12 threads simultaneously through the show, and each of those appears on the screen here essentially as a vertically running timeline, so you can see the history of the intensity of a thread. So I've got a display that's all about that. The contents of the thread, in terms of what lights appear when you put a thread up, what do you see, is all preset in software on there. So, and all of that is very conventional. That works in the same way that the great majority of theatre lighting controls work. So that's, in a way, that's just the mechanics of the thing. It's not part of the research itself. What I'm interested in is what happens in performance and getting away from that, pressing that go button. So we've got 12 threads, and essentially there are two halves to the console. There's the half which is what I call the impulse controller, which is essentially controlled by these main buttons here and the various faders, the big lever here, this pair of faders here, and this fader here. And these are all alternatives that you can select, whichever one you want to operate for a particular moment. Just press the button on it, that becomes the active fader. So that we can, for example, actually I'm just going to go darkish for a moment. Got anything up at the moment? No, we haven't. If we go on to there, so that's a lighting change. Yeah, and if I take those out and bring something else up. Yeah, so this is working essentially like that crossfade. For those of you familiar with the old lighting desks, it's that pair of faders on those old desks, crossfading from one thing to another. But the difference here is that what it's crossfading between is a selection of threads. So you can say, I want these threads to go out and another group of threads to come in. And I can do that on that set of levers. And what you'll find, you're welcome to come and have a little play with this later, is that the way that these faders work is there's a real sense when you're in performance that it's all in the fingertips. You sit there, you hold those faders quite delicately with your finger, and there's a real sense of nuance of control, of delicacy of control. The big lever, as I said, does in one sense exactly the same thing, but because it becomes a full upper body movement to move that, it's against it's a gas spring which provides a kind of constant pressure to push it back that way, so you are physically having to pull against a resistance to work it. And there's what I also found very interesting about it, because of the length of the travel of it, which is obviously much greater than you're used to with any kind of fader, what I discovered is the nuances within a fade. You kind of go, actually, that from there to there, that makes a difference, there to there. So there's this kind of exaggerated sensitivity to every step or every stage in the fade of a light. And this one here, which unfortunately we had some technical issues which meant this didn't work during the performance project, is what I call the resistance fader, resistance controller. It's got a mechanical resistance to movement. So there's a little metal plate here which you can remove and potentially replace. I ended up only actually making one because it wasn't working, so it wasn't worth making anymore. You can see the profile of that. So that kind of cogs as you move it. So I was interested in playing with that idea, that getting away from this idea that there's a kind of perfection about things, that the fader should be a perfectly smooth thing, that the interface should somehow be invisible, transparent between the artist. Because it seemed to me that's kind of saying the same thing as, well, should the violin should have what, no sound, should produce a perfect sine wave as an instrument? Well, no, it doesn't. The great thing about the violin is it isn't perfect in that sort of technical sense as producing a pure sound. It doesn't, and that's what's interesting about it. So trying to kind of introduce that sense of the expressive qualities of the instruments. So that half is the impulse controller. The other half here is the chord controller. And that essentially, obviously, it's an absolutely standard MIDI keyboard, and it's 2-octave keyboard. The left-hand octave brings one of the 12 threads upwards in intensity, and the other octave takes them down in intensity. And you can control the speed that they move at either with a fader here or with the foot pedals, which you can see underneath. And again, it was one of Bentham's little mantras was that the lighting operator had 10 fingers and 2 feet and should jolly well use them. And I think that idea of, kind of using all of the body to manipulate this thing also interested me, I think. So that, and this actually, it's surprising. You think, everybody who drives will be aware of the considerable sensitivity that you acquire in your right foot controlling the accelerator of a car. It is possible to actually be really quite sensitive with that. And it meant that with 10 fingers, potentially you can have 10 of the 12 threads can all be moving at the same time, can start and finish at different times, and you're controlling the speed of travel of them as they change intensity with the foot pedal. So the potential to have quite a complex plot going on is considerable. And we did have actually during the performance one section of the show where there were probably about 5 threads all travelling over quite a long extended time period over several minutes, and then a whole sequence of other lighting changes, lights coming up and going down again quite rapidly on top of that. And it was possible to control all of that with fingers and hands. I will move somewhere else then. Actually, that's probably not going to work because I'm going to be in backlight, aren't I? Any better? Not so much, no. Okay, well, I think I'm probably about to move on to the next stage of this, so I think we're good. What I'd like to do, actually, is just, first of all, just to get you familiar with it, I've got it, it's about, what is it, just under 4 minutes clip from the show. just to run you through it, there are no, I mean, there's an overall lighting change, basically, that runs through this sequence, so there are no really kind of fast and obvious cues in it, so keep an eye out for what is happening lighting-wise. And then it goes into a kind of little scene-changey sequence just at the end of the clip. But if we run this first, and then I will, and Rachel is subtly, or not so subtly, hinting. Yeah, I'll explain that in a moment. And then we'll run through it again. I'll show you a slightly different view of this, where you can see what was going on in control terms through this sequence. And I will attempt to roughly follow it in the room here live, and we'll see how I get on with that. But it's probably also worth mentioning, you can just see on the left-hand side of the video here, that's me. And one of the other areas that I haven't talked to you a lot about, but came out of this business of the lighting artist being able to see what's happening, which is obviously a key part of Bentham's proposal. And I was interested not only in that, but also in the audience's awareness of the lighting artist doing what the lighting artist is doing. And that kind of three-way awareness, because obviously over the rehearsal period built up a considerable awareness between myself and the actors, and interested in that kind of triangular relationship then when you introduce the audience into that. So playing around with the space of this, and the shot here, basically the audience was kind of wrapped round in an arc, not too dissimilar to the arrangement in the room, but a bit slightly curving further round, and the camera set up here roughly in the middle of that sweep of the audience, and sort of corner on to this room-shaped space. The show itself was a devised piece based broadly on the life work and particularly the death story of Walter Benjamin, which you may be familiar with, you may not. In a way, it's kind of irrelevant to this. But I think, Rachel, do you want to play this clip? We'll just take a look at it.
Waste.
Stop. Hang on a second. You liars. So what?
Right, if you want to get us the other video clip, Rachel, thank you. Oh, different. Okay, ooh, that doesn't help. Take that out. That doesn't help either. Okay, just in terms of what you can see on this video here, basically we had a number of cameras set up in the room, so this is a kind of composite view, so it's exactly the same sequence from the show. The main part of the image at the bottom is exactly the same as the view that you've seen previously from that camera. Top left you've got a view down, so you'll be able to see what my hands were doing at the time on the console. The middle, top middle obviously shows you the readout on the screen here, and you'll be able to see basically where you can see here, this bar here, where it's bright like that, that means that it's at full intensity, and the bright patch gets narrower as the intensity goes down, and it ends up, like you see on this one, you just get a thin line there, that shows it's at zero. So you'll be able to try and track the progress of the threads that are used in this scene as we go through, and the top right-hand image is a kind of roughly my viewpoint, as it were, looking at the stage. And so we'll run that again in a moment. Just give me a moment to get set up on here, and I will see if I can keep up. We've set up in the room here, obviously it's not exactly the same setup, but there are equivalent lights, if you like, which you hopefully will recognise primarily through colour and that sort of thing. So with a bit of luck, what happens in the room will bear some relationship to what happens on the video. We shall see. And we need that, and that. Okay.
them yourself.
Rush in, where agency to tread.
Write will stop and restart with every new sentence.
Because I stand up and cool.
With no way out, I had no choice but to end it.
Wait! No! Really?
In a little village in the Pyrenees,
He who doesn't have doesn't see. Means possible face. Yes. Life is not worth living. No vindication means rebellion. Suicide is too much like hard words.
give my regards to Adorno.
Words, of course. What else? You may feel far from comfortable bed. Whose hundred blows struck left-handed.
I would have wished.
Stop. Hang on a second. You lying. So what?
Right. I think what I found very interesting actually doing this exercise here is watching what the threads were doing on the video, which obviously were the threads, their intensities and the timing of the changes in relation to the actual performance, and then following it, in a sense following it here, but trying as much as possible to, yes, follow the action on the video, but to think about the lighting here with us in the space rather than the light on the video, because obviously I'm not controlling that now. And realising that actually, if you look at what the threads are doing, in terms of what happened then and what I was doing that time, quite significantly different. Timing and intensities are quite different. And I think in a way that feels like a vindication of the whole thing, that you don't just reproduce the lighting that happened then, you reproduce the lighting you want now, in the moment, in this space, these lights, this setup, you in the room, me in the room. The only thing we're missing, of course, is the rest of the performance. But that sense of responsiveness to the moment, to the particular circumstances of the here and now, seems to be absolutely what it's all about. And I think, yeah, worked pretty well. I think there's, as always with these things, there's a whole ton of ideas that come out from doing the research that, lead on potentially to other things in the future. So there's kind of a whole list of, what might happen next in research terms. But I think this probably feels like the moment to take any questions and to have whatever kind of discussion we might want to have. I guess. Are there any immediate questions? And also, sorry, and I also want to give people an opportunity to have a play as well. That's important. Yes.
When you were working with the actors, were you working with a director as well?
Yes.
Right, so that
Yeah.
was happening through the rehearsal
Yeah.
process. One thing I noticed massively with the lighting that went on, which I found obviously much stronger in the room
Yeah.
when we were watching the video, obviously, was the change in temperature of the room. And therefore, did you find that the lighting that you did during the rehearsal process massively influenced what happened within the acting and the development?
Yes. The way that let me talk a little bit about how that rehearsal process worked. It was a 35-minute or so piece. We had, I think, 12 days of rehearsal, and then essentially one day performed it twice on one day. Which we, for partly because of reasons to do with the project and partly because other people had other commitments, including myself, we spread out over a slightly longer period. So we were typically rehearsing 3 days a week, with days in between, which also meant that we had time to deal with technical changes, software updates, that, you know, finding bugs and, you know, fiddling around with things technically with that and in the rig. But essentially, throughout that rehearsal process, every day that was a scheduled rehearsal, I was in the room, that was in the room, there was a lighting rig in the room. Didn't mean we always used it, but it was there. And yes, absolutely, and certainly the feedback that I had from the performers very significantly changed the way that they worked. I think almost entirely for the better from their point of view. I think one of the things that was, I mean, it was perfectly obvious actually had I thought of it, but I didn't really anticipate it until we got to writing the schedule, was that, of course, because we'd done all of that, and because the director was also doing the sound and music work for the piece, there was no technical rehearsal. You just kind of incrementally move from playing around with stuff, and it kind of settles down into something you think you're probably going to use, and then it builds up into a whole sequence, and that's something that is going to happen more or less like that, and then it's, well, that really is what's going to happen, and it just gradually shifts, rather than this kind of rather traumatic thing that I mentioned earlier about the out of the rehearsal room into the theatre. Now, obviously, one of the implications of all of this is that, I mean, we were fine. We booked that studio space for the 4 weeks, roughly, that we had it. And, yeah, so that's great, because we're rehearsing in the space we're then performing in, which is clearly a major issue with my proposal. But just going back to your point, yeah, and I think equally for the director, it was really interesting. I never really had any conversations with the director about light as such in the way that I would in a conventional process, where you would have okay, you know, let's meet in the coffee bar, the pub, the wherever, and have a conversation about what we're going to do with the lighting on this piece. That never really happened. It's quite osmotic and quite tacit, a lot of that interactions there. And we never had any real conversations amongst anybody about cueing. The director was assembled, as directors often do in those circumstances, the material, and sort of said, well, we're going to take that thing that we created 2 days ago and that thing, and it'll go in this order. So we knew what order things were going to happen in. We never had those conversations about, oh, well, what's my cue to do this? Oh, it's when I do that. Didn't happen at all, because all of that just arises out of a shared understanding that you get, which, you know, performers will be very familiar with because it's what they have with each other, but then suddenly there's somebody doing the lighting who's also got that. So first, yeah.
You can't sort of improvise per se with it. I mean, so how would you said you just sort of went into the space and kind of fiddled around with it and came up with something that you thought would work. What do you think is the difference between improvising and that?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. No, you can improvise with it. It's not designed for it and doesn't do it as well as it really needs to do it. So one of the issues coming out of the research is that either the design of that needs to be changed to make it easier to play around with, or you need to start with a different instrument that does the playing around and then you move to that, or, I mean, you know, how you do it in a way. And what I mean with that particularly is those threads have to be set up. They have to be plotted actually through a quite conventional process of deciding which lines are going to be in a thread. And that is not something you can do absolutely immediately. It doesn't take that long, but it's not something you can do in the moment. Oh, I want that light there now because an actor's just done that and I want to respond to it. If you've got a thread that's already programmed to do that, then great, I can push the key and there it is. But if I haven't, I have to fiddle around on the laptop and I'm back in the room 30 seconds later and the moment's passed. That's the issue with that, yeah.
Well, I suppose it's just that, in my experience, getting to performance goes to London, you've really got the day of the performance day. But I suppose thinking about it, I was just wondering how that would work, but I guess it would work a little bit like the room here, where you just set up what you've already done in some personal space, and then just work it into the space that you're using.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are...
There's not an awful lot of time to play out, you know.
Exactly. That, you know, there, in a sense, as a research project, it's not answering all the questions, and they're absolutely pragmatic questions like that. So it's challenging a lot of kind of custom and practice, I suppose, particularly within the way that professional lighting, but not only professional lighting, the whole professional process of theatre making is constructed. It challenges ideas of roles and responsibilities, who gets to do what and when, and who's in charge of what, processes, resources, a whole load of stuff, which from a research point of view at the moment are just sat there as issues that in a research context, it's fine, I can work around those because I'm working in a university context and I can pull in the resources I need and we work in the way we need to work. But of course, if you were to roll this out into those professional contexts, suddenly an awful lot of people have to work in a very different way. And if they don't buy into this, of course, they're not going to want to. And that's just how it is, that's fine. But equally, the feedback I had from the director I was working with was very positive, and he really valued a way of working with light that felt much more organic and much less. I mean, what often happens with the professional pressures of time, particularly time, and the difficulty with light of explaining what your idea is. Even experienced designers and experienced directors have some trouble communicating with each other, and I've had plenty of occasions where we've both thought we're on totally the same wavelength. You actually get in the theatre and you put it and you go, this is what we've been talking about for the last 6 weeks, and they go, is it? No, that's not what I've been talking about. I meant more like, and this circumvents all of that kind of stuff, because it feels like you can try stuff with much less risk, I suppose. You try stuff and it doesn't get a response, well, move on. Rather than if something's been rigged in, and 5 people have spent 6 hours putting this rig in, and then kind of go, oh, actually, that doesn't really work, does it? Can we just move half the rig from, and the potential?
One of the things observing the process that I find really interesting, to go back to the point about being able to improvise, I thought the fact that you couldn't, without setting it up in a certain way, just pull things up on demand was actually really helpful, because one of the things that it did was that it may divert the preconceived process that you were discussing of design, which when you're working with lighting, certainly when you then get into the theatre, and you're the last element, and lighting is something which is ethereal in its nature, and that, as Nick articulated, you can't bring that to a design presentation. And you can say it will be a bit like this, and you can describe it, but you see the model box and you kind of have got quite a tangible idea of what the set's going to be like. You can't really do that with lighting, and I think that then leads on to an issue that if you do have something with modern lighting consoles, sure, you want that light up, I can bring that light up for you, but that just makes me back into being an operator. All I'm doing is responding to a director or somebody else to an instruction, rather than actually saying, right, well, this is my preconceived idea, let's have a look at that in context and let's adapt and let's change it in the rehearsal room. Much like I would expect an actor to come having been to the they're actually bringing something into the room as a starter. And so that's what I think is quite interesting about the fact that you do have to really think it through. What are those building blocks going to be? And then out of that, the character of the lighting emerges, rather than the lighting being a functional element that is just laid on at the top. We want to show things creative.
Can I come in the light?
Yes, do.
The questions are also being broadcast to our audience online. 2 questions. Thank you so much for this very, very beautiful introduction to some difficult questions of organic or real-time or live light, and it concerns our research in staging multimedia. In your experience, what do you recommend for performance programs such as ours or others in terms of testing the conjunction of live light with video projection? And secondly, is it possible to direct or to teach projection art, the art of projection in conjunction with light, because very often we first work on the film and then we come with a light later and then we discover problems. But could you develop a score for lighting and projection at the same time?
Yes, I think absolutely you could, and it's interesting the different ways that this works. Certainly, I mean, obviously, you'll know, probably rather more than I do about the sort of the research in this area that's been going on. But think about the way that in the various professional contexts this works. It goes all the way from, I think of somebody who does a lot of work as a video designer in theatre, who's got a film cinema training background, and who produces extremely beautiful, very high quality cinematic film. And that sits, as it were, somehow in conjunction or in relation to a performance, but actually not that much in relation to it. It's kind of, there's the film, it's somehow integrated into the set visually, compositionally, and a performance happens in front of it. And of course, it's composited, I suppose, in the minds of the audience, because we see these things going on at the same time. But that film is made as a film prior to, obviously, with an understanding of how it's going to be used overall, but there isn't that interaction. And at the other end of the scale, I think particularly actually of not so much theatre, but a lot of the work that's done with video, and not necessarily video in the sense of something that's been recorded through a camera, but visual imagery in a video format that may be computer generated, graphically generated, and then manipulated in real time, used particularly in concert production, using media servers, which are often actually controlled either by the same person who's controlling the lighting, or with the same interface as the person. So a lighting desk is used to control the media server, and those projectors, and they're often automated in the same way that an automated light is, that it can pan and tilt and point to different places and all of that. It's seen as a light source, just as these as relatively steam age light sources. It's like that, but you can control the field of light, and you can have a little blue patch there and something else there, and it's just done through a video technology. But really, it's a light that you've just got a whole load more control over. And in a way, you're not producing content in the same way with that. You need content because you can't operate all of that in real time. There's too many parameters. But there is a content, but it may be quite an abstract, patterned piece of material that just gives a texture and a colour quality and transitions within the beam of light that may be projected onto a surface, or it may be used to light, the rock singer belting away on lead vocals, or moved around on the stage and mixed and all sorts of things. So talking about that, at that latter end, I think absolutely the idea of scoring light and media, the two things potentially can really merge together. I think there's a raft of technical issues. I think back a few years now, but only because I've talked at some length with the lighting designer on A Woman in White, the Lloyd Webber adaptation of the Wilkie Collins novel in the West End, which was an absolute nightmare for the lighting designer, because Bill Dudley, the set designer, also designed all of the projection work. It was all 3D computer renders, basically, of all of these spaces and buildings and environments and all the rest, projected onto kind of neutral surfaces in the stage space. And practically on a daily basis, the designer would come in with the latest re-renderings of these things, and the lighting designer has lit a scene with this as a backdrop to it, and the next day suddenly the key light's coming from the other direction. The sun has moved from one side of the stage to the other. Right, so we start again and we relight the scene. And these kind of pragmatic issues, and colour matching, if you want it to colour match, obviously you don't have to have it, and that's an aesthetic choice, whether that is the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. But if you do, how are you going to do that? It can be very difficult. It's hard to get colour matching to work. All of the technical issues about keeping light off the screen but getting the light where you want it on the performers, and all of, there's a whole raft of stuff. But the more it can be thought about together from the beginning, rather than developed separately and then trying to you know, put them together at the end, I think you're better if your chances of success both technically and artistically with it.
I think there's a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, I don't understand.
Come into the light.
I don't understand what this station can do that a normal high-tech lighting desk can do in a rehearsal or a performance if someone's operating it live and you choose what lights you've got on, you know, which sliders.
Yeah.
And that comes in a much more compact, smaller than what you've got here.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could
explain that. Yes, no, absolutely, yeah. Well, in some ways, the answer is quite a lot of what it can do can be done by those desks. One of the issues, you know, this is partly a research project that's about developing an interface, if you like, to the lighting system, but it's also a research project that's about a whole load of other questions and desires, I suppose, to change the way things are done. So it's partly, well, I think inspired by that, and then you know, developed and many other influences which I haven't had time to talk to you about. The question, you know, if you're thinking about a rock and roll context, I think yes, absolutely, quite a lot of that is done. There's different flavours of concert production. Some of it, and you might think, I don't know, a big Kylie Minogue show is absolutely time-coded to every, you know absolutely when everything happens. She is hitting marks on the stage at a moment in the music. Its time code locks the whole thing together. The video, the lighting, the staging, the sound, it's automated. You could practically push the button, and as long as the human element of it follows and does what it's supposed to do at the right time, you've got a show. Okay, so that's the total opposite end of this. Absolutely locked down, canned. There's the kind of rock and roll that is absolutely about being responsive in the moment in the way that I'm talking about. And in those situations, one of two things happens. Either the lighting designer goes on tour with it, and they are the operator as well as the designer, or they work very closely with somebody they trust to have artistic responsibility. And they, as it were, put a framework together, both a physical system, a rig, and a conceptual framework, a set of almost rules about, okay, this is how the rig gets used. You know, that number and that number and that number have got green in, none of the other numbers have. Okay, that's a rule. Then the operator goes out and they're performing it live, and that's very interactive, very much about working an audience, working with the music. They're capable, if the band gets halfway around the tour and one of the numbers is higher up the charts than they thought it was going to be, they change the set order or bring a whole new song into the set, that operator is perfectly capable of responding to that. They will create the lighting for a whole number without the designer, because they know how it works artistically. So, and of course the kind of lighting controls that they're using for that type of lighting are designed to do that, and are therefore in a way more similar to this than a theatre lighting control. Theatre lighting control is predicated on the idea that you've got loads of tools for setting up a really complex plot ahead of time, but when it comes to the performance, it's got one button on it marked go, and that's the one that gets pressed. And so in a sense that's different. The other thing I think is really that is different about this that you won't see anywhere else is this idea of multiple controllers that essentially do the same thing, but they do it in a physically different way. So the physicality of the operator comes into play. There's no lighting controller, commercial lighting controller that I'm aware of that does that.
Oh, what's this brown thing on here?
Yeah, I was hoping nobody would ask about that, but it's obvious that you would, only because it doesn't work at the moment. Okay. It's what we call the pad, and there's a drumstick here, and you can whack it. And again, it's a different physicality, but there's a percussive and obviously informative quality to that. That's another question. It was an area that I wanted to explore within the project. I wouldn't say it's not integral to the research. Other ideas within the research would exist without that. But this idea of, yes, the audience being aware of the lighting artist and the kind of layering that you get from that, somebody watching and creating in the moment that it's happening is interesting. And some of the feedback I got from the audience from the piece was very interesting in that, in terms of how that was interpreted all the way from quite specific, seeing the lighting artist as Walter Benjamin's nemesis within this, and taking very specific character and kind of force for dramatic action within the piece, to something that was much less specific, I suppose, and much more about a kind of an active observer in a way, being in play. But I think, and certainly for both for me and, interestingly, the director quite extensively, we had quite a lot of discussions afterwards about how from his perspective it changed the way the audience watches, and something that he's really interested in is how a performance piece teaches the audience how to watch it while it's watching it. And the fact of observing the lighting artist. And there was actually the very first sequence in the piece, which was, I don't know, 2-3 minutes long, was actually with no actors on stage at all. It was light and sound. And we just introduced the room. For those of you, very briefly, the point, what we're interested in particularly about Walter Benjamin is that he died in a hotel room escaping, trying to flee the Nazis on the border between France and Spain. And he may have committed suicide, it's not entirely clear. There's a whole load of conspiracy theories about whether he was assassinated by whoever and all of this kind of stuff. But it's an intriguing story. And so our stage space there was essentially this hotel room that he was in on that night.
I was thinking you were referring to his work in
Well, I mean, it's yes, it was not a literal telling of that story, but I think that the drama of that moment, I think, was a kind of key influence. But yes, we were reading, across quite a lot of his work, and yes, and just interested in the ideas of text, and I'm just intrigued, I suppose, by the idea of how you stage such a cerebral life and existence, really, and how you communicate that to an audience. But I think certainly some of the feedback from the audience about a kind of a brooding quality that they detected in the piece, a kind of just a staying with an atmosphere and a world and an existence of somebody, and being with a character over, I mean, obviously actually over only just a little over half an hour, but a sense of just concentrating on that. And I think knowing how the thing is being made, and that the lighting artist is there making it in the moment and interacting, which I think at some level the audience was reasonably aware of, I think contributed to that quality in the piece. Yeah.
Several of them, when they were talking about the lighting, said that the lighting was Nick, the performing with Nick, rather than what we're fairly used to, which is the lighting happens and the lighting is the lighting. It was interesting that they personified it and that they played with it rather than they sort of carried on and did what they did and the lighting worked on top.
Yeah, that absolutely identified a shift from their point of view in terms of an expectation of being lit. I do my thing and somebody else somewhere in the dark out there is responsible for making sure I'm lit, to something that was much more interactive and much more about them potentially responding to something that I do, as well as me responding to them.
You weren't in the corner doing all of this.
No, absolutely.
You were on the stage as the light changing. I think that's
and we'd spent 12 days together in the rehearsal room working on this.
Do you expect directors like Katie Mitchell to have an impact on the way theatre will be produced in the future, that more camera people on stage, more lighting people on stage?
Well, Katie Mitchell's a really interesting example with this, because I think, I was particularly thinking of the Waves piece, which absolutely was this, although of course with what were, I suspect from her point of view, people she would think of as actors manipulating cameras and lights and all of that. And I think there's an interesting question here about what do we mean by an actor, what do we mean by an operator, what do we mean by a designer, which this is all trying to call into question. I think that kind of work seems to me not that quickly, but is gradually becoming of more interest to more people. And I think it's certainly worth observing, having gone to see the recent Lepage piece at the Barbican, that the audience at the Barbican for that is, probably about 20 years younger on average than what you'll see at the National, typically. So it does seem to me that there is, that kind of theatre seems to be of greater interest to a younger audience and therefore presumably to a future audience. Katie Mitchell, I think, is interesting because if you read what she writes about directing, it's fantastically old-fashioned in this respect, and I haven't been quite sure. Is that what she really thinks? She talks on the one hand about collaboration and ensemble and the importance of designers for her work and working collectively with them and all of that kind of thing, and then also gives this advice to young directors: don't ever have a conversation with your designer in front of the actors, because you'll worry the actors if you start having a conversation about an issue with their costume or something. And I just, well, what is this about having conversation in different rooms? I just find it very bizarre, and I'm not sure if that's because she thinks that's the advice she somehow ought to be given, even if it's not what she thinks, or... Anyway, of course, and there we are. I've been broadcast all over the internet saying that now, so I'm probably not Katie Mitchell's friend now, but anyway, probably wasn't before, so there we go. Yeah, any more? Does anybody want to have a go? Anybody brave enough to... Yeah, you do. I do? Yeah. Come on, take a seat. Okay, let's start with something easy. I'll knock off, that's a kind of working light effectively, let's just have that on. Okay, so we'll do something simply on the crossfade pair here, okay. I'll just push buttons in a slightly obscure way. So let's start off, if you push that button there, the top one, okay, so that's going to bring that thread up, okay, and now just move both levers together across. Yeah, so, and that's bringing up that light up there. Okay, and you can see the intensity changing on here. If people want to gather round, if you're interested in, try and keep out of the way of the camera.
Because they've got two lines here.
Yeah, one for up, one for down. So if you want to select something to come up, you do the top button, and select it to go down, you do the bottom button. So bring that all the way until the end of the travel. That's it. Okay. So now we'll bring. Let's bring that up. Yeah, and take the one you brought up down.
So then I just need to...
exactly. Back the other way, and you'll see that will go out, and the warm coloured one next to it will come up.
Oh, I can see. So it starts bringing down.
Yeah. Okay. Now that bit of it is 50-year-old technology, essentially. Yeah, absolutely straightforward. The one thing that was actually very important to me, however, this interest in the physicality of it, those faders come out of a lighting board that must be at least probably 30 or certainly 25 years old. As far as I can make out, you cannot get, this is called a quadrant fader, where it works on an arc rather than a straight line. It makes a huge difference to how your fingers work on it. It's much easier to get a really controlled fade. And so, luckily I've got a friend and colleague who's a great collector of period lighting equipment, and he very kindly allowed me to strip two faders out of an old desk that he's got. Yeah, so you need to, so whatever's up you need to select to come down if you want it to come down. Yeah.
Fair enough.
So with that controller, it's a question of constantly changing what you've got selected here and operating it. Now if you want, so what have we got up? So if we, yes, we take that down now and let's bring that up.
Okay.
Do it on the big lever this time. So press the red button on the top to select it. You don't need to hold it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then pull.
So what does it do?
Yeah, so you can see that light coming up. And just think about the physical difference between doing that and doing it on here. Yes, at one point the fantasy version of this was absolutely like a signal box lever that you had to kind of throw your weight against to get it to move.
Fascinating. Can I ask?
Yes. Okay.
What is the difference? These are obviously buttons, and to be fair, you could have it without this function.
You could. You could do it all on here, or you could do it, all on there. Okay. It's a different way of working, and I was interested in both, so I built them both in. But they are.
And this is obviously a slight homage.
Yeah.
I'm a pianist, so I'd use the keyboard. Whereas if someone who isn't that way inclined, more inclined to use
I think two things. One, of course, you will have personal preferences, but also they produce different FX and affects out of it. The thing with this is that everything travels at the same speed, okay? But you can start threads moving at different times because when you put your finger down. This I found really good for all of the long fade stuff, and these faders were better for the quicker stuff, where over up to a few seconds. The lovely thing about this, and the little demonstration that I did, the slow fading stuff, because it's on the foot pedal, you get used to just how much foot pedal you need to get it to go at a nice slow speed, and if it's going a bit too slowly, you push down just slightly on your foot, just with the car, you know, you're dropping below the speed you want, you just a bit more down, you know, you go up a hill, so you just need to put a bit more on the accelerator. So you're riding the speed in relation to everything else that's happening during the performance.
This has reminded me of interesting though.
Yeah, I was reading that. Yeah.
I didn't talk about this. Basically, this is a way of changing the content of the thread.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that effectively you get more than 12 threads. Now, conceptually, what I wanted was that these are what I call morphs within a thread, that they should be conceptually related. Now, in reality, that didn't quite work, and basically I needed slightly more threads than I actually had. And the limit to the number of threads was partly driven by the cost, because buttons are relatively expensive. You know, the software's fine, the software could handle loads more. But the hardware, it gets more expensive. It also becomes bigger, less easy to reach things. Currently it's very neat because it's a 2-octave keyboard. 1 octave is 12 keys, is 12 threads. So it all kind of works. I think for this show, ideally 16 would have probably been about right.
It's funny because in the 90s, with when we went, when they were really pushing digital editing techniques and fast editing, there's Media 100, Avid, different ones that were coming up, and fast was trying to create a hybrid because people who were analog editors, and I used to edit analog, who you're trying to find, now you just push a button, but when you're working with analog tape, you're doing it manually, and so there's a different tension, and they were trying to do sort of like this hybrid system, which we don't see anymore.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Was trying to do that, so that you had those two.
Yes. Yes, there is. I mean, it's
ranges of sensitivity, which I think you're talking about. Yeah, which is definitely
absolutely. And I think that there's, for me, there's clearly an interest in a return to analog qualities here through digital technologies, which I think is.
This one with digital.
Yeah.
We almost think that we're gaining in the digital, and keeping the hybridity, I think, is really important.
And I think there's been a lot of interest in the inherent qualities of digital. Quite understandably, it's new, doesn't feel quite so new now, but has been kind of new and exciting. So what is it about digital aesthetically that digital does that we didn't used to have? Of course, people are interested in that, but also
ease of use is one of the biggest things. And the driving force is you don't need as much skill. Anyone to a certain extent can use a digital.
Yes, although
but you don't.
No, exactly. Yeah, this is
You can all give it a go. More knowledge, or it's a better result.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you don't edit video if you know how to push buttons.
Yeah. And it's I mean, what you were saying about the video editing thing, how much faster with an analog thing you can, if you want to find a point in a video,
you do it
because you can do, well, I know it's that fast, so I speed through it and then slow down and find it. Fiddling around pushing the 2 times speed button, the 4 times speed button, all of that. I know if you've got one of those digital television recorders, trying to skip the adverts never works, does it? Because you're either sitting there going, well, I'm doing 2 times, I might as well just watch the adverts, or you 16 times and I've missed it. And a dial, I could do that really accurately.
No, it's interesting. This is really interesting. I love the photometric. I think that's really funny.
Yes.
I'm good. So
Sure.
My name's Sue.
Yes, yeah.
Did you know?
Yes.
Did we meet before? Did we meet?
Not properly. I saw you at the DRHA conference and didn't get a chance to talk to you, and we emailed.
Okay.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yes, let's do that.
Let's do that at some stage.
Absolutely.
What were you thinking of? Were you thinking of further putting in a kind of proposal, or?
Yes, I think my top priority is get my PhD is kind of that close to finished, but you know what it's like. There was the last seems to be the longest. I've done. There's certain revisions I've asked for. I just need to do them, but I'm hoping not to take anything off. But realistically, yeah. The major program rewrite, which is very talented. So realistically, probably, yeah, absolutely. Would work in as I haven't. Well, I've thought about kind of clear ideas about how the practical work. In the end, you know, that's the kind of the conceptual thinking that underpins this and the within the PhD. How you turn it into something that makes sense, don't, or maybe you just. But then the conceptual feels like it kind of goes. Some articulate the practice in a way, or maybe it would be better to use those as some chapters with other people something that's a bit I suppose, and in a way that would be a really interesting conversation to have with you, because you might be aware of other material and writers. But probably what I should do is to write something up that sort of says, here are the things I'm interested in, here's the material that I've kind of already got that can be PhD thesis, so that, you know, there could be a chapter that's kind of about this and about that, and that gives you something to respond to.
Yeah, you could do that. The other thing is that you could go on the programme at the moment and have a look at the code and look at the proposal. And
sure, no, yeah, yeah.
Because it will actually, in a way, you could do the same thing.
Yeah.
Then you can think about all the other things, so that I know it's only going to be a draft.
Yeah.
That would kind
Fine.
of
Okay. Yeah. No, well, that would be a sensible way of structuring it, then, wouldn't it? Yeah. So it comes to you as a kind of rough cut proposal that you can then respond to and say, oh,
I think that's probably a good idea, because it's kind of them responding, and it helps you as well, rather than doing something that, you know, that will help you.
Yeah, of course, to structure it and think about the issues that need thinking about.
Well,
yeah, fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Brilliant, and you. Yeah.
No, really interesting.
Are you off? You're working. You've got it sorted now, haven't you? Yeah, I can tell.
This is my type of thing.
Yeah.
I'm old enough to need things to move. No, that's fab. Well, I'm a director. I trained at RADA.
Oh, right, okay, right, yeah.
So it's all thinking, actually, do you know, it's absolutely right. It is everything working together. I've, over the last couple of years, just got this fantastic way of gathering all sorts of people together, brilliant actors, brilliant whoever, and work with them to create something. And it's such a freedom from having had the rigidity of working as I did. RADA was brilliant, but I tended to work with directors who were fabulous.
It's a fairly conventional mainstream model that they do. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, did it, came out, worked professionally, lovely, thank you. But now I've just got an excitement I don't think I've ever had before. Working on, it was really interesting watching it, and as I said, the atmosphere. Because over the length of time, you're absolutely right, you don't notice the subtleties of lighting. But you do when you feel that actually it's gone very cold, it's gone very, there was a warmth at the beginning, it's actually, and a timeline, in such a short space of time, you really felt the movement of a massively long time. So really liked it. Oh, all right then, no, I'll let you. But it's great, isn't it? But how do you find? What can I press? Because you're teaching at Rose Bruford. Oh, well, you're not watching.
Okay, let's do the easiest thing first. Have we got any threads? So yeah, that thread's up at the moment. So if you hit the red button, and that'll just clear the selections here. That's all. Well, there's the advanced course. So you select this thread to go down by pressing the lower of those buttons, and bring this thread up by selecting the top button. Press that red button to select that pair of faders, and then it'll happen. Yeah, so that lamp's coming up there.
That one's going down. Oh, I kind of think I know how it works then.
Yeah, I think it's really fun. Obviously, the technical part of it is the input and knowing which one. But that's what I was going to ask you. If you had a basic run of 12 mood lighting things,
Yeah.
which is that's why I was reading along
Yeah.
the top. Obviously, being an actor, the first one I did was Angels and got a spot.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
that was fantastic. It's intuitive, but I do think this is intuitive.
Yeah.
And so, although you're sort of saying that this would be my fear in a way, is you're then, if you're working on a project with a group of people, you are actually integral as far as time. 12 days is actually quite
Yeah.
short.
It is. It was only half-hour piece.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
To be fair, I mean, you think
Yes,
about
yes.
Thank you very much.
Not at all.
Bye.
Where I'm coming from is you're going, okay, like, you know, if I could be in complicity, that would be lovely.
Yeah.
Move Simon out the way. And you know, that sort of
Yeah.
work, fantastic. But you need to then to say to someone, right, we'd
Yeah.
like you on board right from day one and
Yeah.
work through. Brilliant.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you therefore
And
become
you
a
know,
performer. The lighting
Yeah, exactly.
is the
Yeah.
another performer
Yeah.
within it,
yes,
which is what you're really saying.
yes,
It
yeah.
is, isn't
It's
it?
exactly. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
scribble out my notes and put that down.
Exactly.
Fantastic. But you're having fun now.
Yeah, I think I've worked.
Have you sussed it?
Hopefully. I don't know yet.
Yeah, it's lovely. Fun to work on for you as well.
Yeah.
I think I've selected one that's
It
not going
is.
to come on.
'Cause
Yes. Beat sitting at the desk, which I spend most of my time doing.
It's
But, you know.
different, isn't it? It's a different. I find it absolutely fascinating that there was a time when lighting operators couldn't see the stage.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me.
Well, it was just, you know, it was absolutely a technical job.
Yeah,
And interestingly,
everyone knows a techie,
Michael Northern, who was one of those very first lighting designers who started as a stage manager, he, in his autobiography, mentioned going to, which theatre? The theatre in Hull, which was next door to the fire station. And it was the relief firemen crewed the shows.
Yeah.
So you might get, particularly on, on a matinee, where you just, the relief firemen were in, a shout would go up next door and it'd all disappear onto the fire engine. There'd be no lighting, no set changes, no nothing, because the crew had gone.
Well, I mean,
And there was a kind
originally
of...
the crew were all sailors anyway, which is why we've got so many roads.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sense of the professionalism, that sense of the professionionalism that we expect now isn't necessarily in the same way.
Changed.
Yeah.
It's interesting when Johannes said about digital work, because this is what we've just done a module on digital technology, which for me was just like, oh, okay. I had to sort of start from scratch, whereas everyone else with their iPods and everything else are all there already. But Johannes is right. We have a major problem in people not allowing the screen and the lighting. The two things were not done concurrently.
Yeah.
You got the light, you got your film, you were happy with your film, and then you lit.
Yeah.
But quite often you lit when actually the film wasn't running.
Yeah.
And
This
that's
is one of the big problems that, I mean, understandably, because it's still relatively new, all of this. People are still trying to work out how to handle is this issue that in all sorts of ways, as soon as you stick, particularly moving image, onto the stage, it becomes all absorbing.
Yeah.
Absorbs your attention, it takes over kind of creatively, and also kind of has this tendency to get all of the other technical departments to run round after it. The set designers go, there has to be a surface or something this is going to be projected on. Lighting designers get, my biggest objective now is lighting the actors and not lighting the screen. That's a big backward step in lighting terms. It doesn't have to be like that, but it will only not be like that as people develop the working methods to...
The big screen
Yeah.
idea. When I saw at the 25th anniversary of the Miz, I did see the Lepage as well. I just threw that in, and the disappearing number, and but I took my family to see that, and there's some really lovely effects within that. And unfortunately, we were up at the top in the thing, looking like that for most of the time. But there was some beautiful effects, and actually the lighting, I think, in that, whether it's true or not, enhanced what was going on rather than. But actually, when the digital effect, when the screen effect worked, was when it was in darkness. It was in the sewer, and you had the things like that, a few bits and pieces. That was interesting. Sorry.
Pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you ever so much for that.
That's
That's
all.
great.
Yeah, good.
Lovely. I'm excited.
Bring that down.
No, now we've got. You don't need to press that. So. Once you've
No,
pressed
you've just,
it, you just
in fact,
press it and leave
yes.
So what's this?
You might need to
See,
let it.
I'll
Might need
teach.
to let it find its position again. Go for it.
It's lovely, isn't it?
See what I mean? But just that motion, it's effectively the same faders. But compare, do the same thing, but compare using that to operating it on there. You just, you select whichever one you want to control it by. So at the moment we've told it to go down, so it's already down.
And
so
it is all in the mechanics, because as soon as it becomes digitised, it's capturing it off a fader. It's exactly the same resolution electronically. It gets processed in exactly the same way in software.
There's no subtlety there, Graham.
yeah, so yeah.
So there's two faders.
One for up, one for down.
Any minute now.
So you can split the crossfade.
Right.
And you do an exciting crossfade.
So if you want to, are they up? So that will bring them down, but you can select several of them at once. You had some very interesting UV stuff going on there, hadn't you?
I thought that was you guys doing it.
Absolutely, it was.
Yeah, it's all part of the plan.
Do you see what I mean? So that's selected all of them. Now it's just bringing that one down, but all the other ones are coming up. So if you want some of those to go down,
So the camera's liking that,
Very
do you
nice.
see what I mean?
It's true.
I can see you.
but not for long,
Yeah.
because
Bye.
Graham's in charge.
But compare. So just bring everything else down. So bring them down on there. Yeah. Okay. And then if we were going to bring them all up again, so select the ones that you just want to change. Okay. And then select this, just press the red button. And compare the level of sensitivity you've got using that.
I prefer the old-fashioned handle, really.
Yeah.
I prefer the handle. You feel that
It's
you've got
got a
more.
good feeling about it, doesn't it?
It's exciting too.
And that's the kind of sensitivity you don't have on a
On a
modern
fader.
desk.
Yeah.
Because if you're using, it's exactly what Nick said, your performance is in your fingers here, whereas here it's in your whole body, and you can really put your whole physicality into the sensitivity of that fader.
And the fact it's resisting you as well.
Yeah.
It's very reassuring, actually.
resist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a gas spring, so there's a pressure to push the lever back.
Did you build it?
Yes.
Very
No, I can
nice.
tell the
It's,
pipes. I love the pipes.
plumbing.
That's
Yes,
the mechanical
it's copper
engineering background.
plumbing pipe. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And you fit this in your van or car?
Car. Yeah.
That's right, isn't it?
Nothing else fits in the car, but
The key bit.
And you need a
My son.
So
So
if you were to select
computer here?
yeah, it's basically there's no intelligence in this part at all. It's just switches and faders. It's all captured, so it's all coming in analog through all these cables. It's a set of MIDI boxes, basically, that capture the switch closures and the faders to MIDI, brought into the computer in MIDI, and then the software obviously does all of the work, essentially.
And the software is something that
It's custom written. No, I wrote it myself. Yeah.
it's not called Calypso, no.
No, that's just yeah.
But this is your design for the Benjamin show?
That's right. Yeah. So these were my cue sheets. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So it was. I mean, it worked. By the time we got to performance, I basically knew the show, but it felt touch and go, and so I wanted something. I mean, in the same way that I don't know, a concert pianist might still want to have the score in front of them, even if they basically know it.
So you've got.
But it's not the stage, is it? That's
No. This is a timeline showing what the threads are doing.
okay, the threads. So
That's just showing me what the setup on the buttons on
you
the
don't need
console
a
is.
sketch of where the actors are.
No,
I was saying to Rachel,
because I'm looking.
This one.
You know.
I was saying to Rachel, it's very much like a conductor would conduct a live orchestra to bring something to life.
Yeah.
Something like that can be.
Yeah.
You can't just go on something like that. You
No,
need
absolutely,
that
it's that,
conductor there
yeah.
to make sure
Yeah.
everything happens on
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I've never thought about it that way
Yeah.
before. It being a persona in itself for life,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
working with it more. So
And I think there's something I'd be quite interested in doing, which I'm very. Is the pedal down? Have you given it any speed? Or no, you're on here. You're on the time fader there. So it should be. Yeah. Yeah. It's having multiple lighting performers in the same way that you know, jazz band or something, improvises around. You know, I'd just quite like to play with, you know, several people in the room, each controlling part of the lighting rig and how they would interact with each other.
So that's up at the moment. If we do the same one, let's get down.
Thank you very much for coming.
Not at all, pleasure.
Giving me some inspiration. I'll take Rachel's cards. So.
Fantastic, yeah. Well, you can always contact me through you know, Johannes. Yeah, absolutely.
What you might want to do is, you know, like you select if you're playing.
Very good. Well, thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you very much.
And then control them all in terms of. The speed and everything that they all come up at. It's so much more confusing, but yet simple.
I mean, it's complicated because there were so many different things I wanted to try out, really. You know, you wouldn't...
So you've just got a repeated motion for everything, basically?
Yeah. So there are you know, you could... There are kind of simpler versions of it. I mean, in a sense, there's a version that could probably be made out of just the keyboard and the software at one level, which might be the touring version when we get fed up with...
There's a fun element to this, isn't there?
Yes, it would be different.
You're just pressing buttons.
Yes, I am just pressing buttons.
That's fine. Buttons are there to be pressed. But you're not. You need to select. So we go back. Yeah.
It's so hard when you got the light on it.
And what people scared of the things that.
That's really exciting. That's really exciting.
And how did you get it to narrow in last time? During the performance you had these graphic narrow...
Yes, that shows the intensity.
And how is that? How is intensity controlled?
Well, anything that you're doing is controlling the intensity of the thread. So if it's the full width, it's at full on the dimmer.
Just bring it up like that, so whatever, I don't know what I'm bringing up. Okay.
Yeah, here it comes. These are coming up,
Yeah.
So part way through the fade.
Right. I can push it back a little bit, and I can put it forward.
Yeah. That's the pad. Doesn't work at the minute, sadly.
Tell me that is the blackout.
It could be. It could be anything.
I just think
anything you want set up on
sensitivity. Right at the end, we've got absolutely right. The amount of time you, because when I directed here, I was up on lighting because I knew that I can't. I didn't want to know if that was Molly I was directing, but I knew there's a bit at the end, and every time we rehearsed it, it's slightly different. It can't be. So me on the just on the fake to blackout is easy, and you're going to do that live. But I just think there's such a humour of this beautifully tender scene just finishing whack, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We used it twice in the show. At the top of the show to start the thing. And there was a kind of a break. They're having. I think basically the three versions of Benjamin that you see kind of have this row, and it gets interrupted by the
lovely. See, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I assume the live as well.
No, it wasn't. The soundtrack was all pre-recorded. Now, interesting, because we had quite a lot of discussions about. I mean, it was actually a pragmatic decision. I wanted originally to bring somebody in who would work in the same way with sound as this. And it's just unfortunately there wasn't anybody available to do it. Well, actually, another colleague at the college would have been ideal, but just timing-wise didn't work. And so the director agreed to create the sound. Now, I think in some ways, why is it pre-recorded? What I found really interesting during one of the performances in front of an audience, there was a moment, there was quite a complicated bit during the show where the three actors assembled out of various bits of paper what we called the map, basically. It was a lot of it was maps, diagrams, manuscript stuff on different textures of paper. And anyway, it gets assembled, sort of stuck together, and they hang it up on a kind of washing line thing.
So that was because that one was down before.
And it was a relatively late entry in the show. It was obviously quite a fiddly thing to do. And they were getting better at it quite rapidly at this point. So the whole assembly of the map on that first performance in front of the audience went way quicker than it ever had before. And of course there's this music, and we're all used to this music that's essentially setting the time for that sequence. And we're all kind of, oh well, here we are, maps up, you know. And I was thinking, so what do I do? Do I do the cue that I do bringing the backlight up on the map when it happens, but that's also kind of goes with the music. Do I wait for the music, or do I improvise something totally different, or what? And there was this moment of what I didn't talk about, because there's too many things to talk about, was one of the influences in my thinking with this was Deleuze's book, The Logic of Sensation, on Francis Bacon's kind of self-understanding as a painter, and this interest that he has in introducing the accidental into his work, but in a controlled way.
Right. Okay.
So it's not your kind of Jackson Pollock action art kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's absolutely controlled, but it's similar. But it then informs how how he works, and is, from Bacon's point of view, essentially trying to avoid cliche and stopping the painting falling into a cliched response. And that seemed to me that kind of balance between design intention and randomness and the accidental seemed to be something I wanted to try and do. And Bacon talks about the crisis, the confusion, the chaos, that what he calls the diagram, which is this kind of pre-work that is done in this sort of randomised way that then informs the rest of the painting process. And this sense, and that was the moment of chaos for me, because this random element had entered the performance. We've got there too fast. But the way that the chaos can be productive, because my mind was absolutely spinning. Of course, part of it's a bit of a panic about what are we going to do, but also all of these possibilities suddenly, coming out. We could do this, and also thinking, and of course they're doing the same as me. Their minds are spinning as well, and do you know what? Maybe the audience's minds are slightly there because they become aware of this
feeling, atmosphere.
Hang on, something's not. Shouldn't something be happening, or is it meant to be not happening, or has it gone wrong? And of that, absolutely, and that of course comes out of the music being fixed.
Yes.
So there's a kind of resistance to change,
element, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Within it, as you say, that you could then use productively.
Yeah.
I'm assuming
Yes.
the happy ending of that is you did something and it was,
Yeah, well, it came back. Absolutely, it came back. I mean, the collective decision that we seemed to make was to wait until the point, we've caught up with the music, and the music's caught up with us, as it were. But obviously, other decisions were possible, and as it happened. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Nick. And at this moment, we will be signing off from London. Thank you all for joining us today. This is Johannes Birringer from the Brunel Drama Studio. Our guest today was lighting designer Nick Hunt from the UK, Rose Bruford College. He's a teacher and designer, and he introduced his custom-built light organ lighting instrument. And this was a long session because he ended the question and answer period with a kind of a demo where students and young artists here from the university were invited to work on the light console. And we are now going to sign off the air, and our next event will be actually fairly soon, April 4th and April 5th. We are holding a workshop at the Arto Center dedicated to the late Buto dancer Kazuo Ono, and this forum workshop is called The World from Within and Without. And if you want to join us, we will try to broadcast some of the performances and some of the roundtable discussions between the invited artists. The Brunel Performance Research Series is being archived. We are now in our 3rd year, and I hope you will be able to easily access our various seminars that we send to the DanceTechNet from here. Thank you very much, and goodbye.